Hi there, this is Alvin, and welcome to the Kickstart Commerce podcast, where we share search marketing and domain investing strategies to help grow your business. In today's episode, our guest is Kristen Anderson, founder and CEO of Catch, a technology startup combining savings, investment, and insurance for those without access to employer benefits. Today, Kristen and I dive into the details and the story behind how she caught the vision to birth Catch, the decision-making process to brand Catch using .co versus .com, the overall impact of a non.com digital presence, and last but not least, how Catch is serving people in general, as well as helping those of us greatly impacted by COVID-19, also known as the novel coronavirus. So with that, Kristen, welcome, and thank you for making time to join us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, certainly. So, Kristen, before we dive into the details, allow me a moment to catch, no pun intended, everyone up on how we cross paths. And so so at the time of this recording, we're at the end of April, but about a couple months ago, which seems like years ago because of COVID, back in February, I was on my way back to the office to record another domain investor for this very podcast. And so on the way back, a billboard caught my eye, to say the least. And it said catch.co. Obviously, being the domain investor that I am, I made a block, came back, took a picture, snapped a photo of the billboard, came back, and then as all things, tend to work together, that very domain investor that I was interviewing is a .co domain investor. And so I actually put the image up on Twitter, posted it to Twitter, tagged that same domain investor as well as Catch, and Kristen responded. And so it was interesting that all of this works together. Now, fast forward today, and we've tried a few times to get our schedules lined up, but nothing happened. Nothing would ever come up or come into sync with one another until obviously the unexpected and unfortunate incident of COVID happened. And so here we are today. So, Kristen, to kick things off, let's share with our listeners at a high level, a bit about yourself, who you are, your personal, professional background.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Kristen Anderson. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Catch. We provide portable benefits for freelancers, contractors, and independent workers. I am based in Boston, Massachusetts, but most of the time I'm on the road. The last couple months have been an interesting deviation from that, the last decade of my career. And I've done everything. I've been a professor at a university. I've worked at nonprofits. I've worked at Fortune 500 companies. And ultimately founding this company was sort of the accumulation of all of my hopes and dreams and the chance to really build something that I thought would make a difference.
Wow. And here's the interesting thing. So Kristen does not look a day past 21 at all. At all. And so she's definitely had the breadth of a career. And so it's just interesting. So kind of take us back, to what was going on at the very moment that Catch was conceived.
Yeah, and I truly can't take all the credit. I have an incredible co-founder who was actually the one who lived this problem, a lot more than I did. He was a freelancer, engineer, designer, was building products for technology companies. And he was just incredibly frustrated and felt that all of the stuff in our lives that's fun to do, food, travel, entertainment, all of the technology around that is beautiful and elegant and easy. And then all the things in our lives that we have to do, like taxes and retirement planning and health insurance, is all really outdated, really hard to use, very spread out. There's no good solution. And it particularly isn't oriented towards people who work on their own. We tend to, use benefits through an employer on average, but there is a large and growing number of people who are independent, self-employed business owners or gigsters, freelancers, whatever you want to call it, who don't have access to those tools. So he brought me in because my background included experience in fintech. So I know how to work with banks, right? If the idea is you need to get a dollar from over here to over here, how does that actually happen? And so he brought me into the team to really serve that role of like connecting all the dots. And he leads our engineering and design team, and I lead sort of our partnerships, go to market, and sort of overall strategy.
Wow. And so how long ago was all of this? So I mean, we're in 2020, so when did all this take place?
He started prototyping the product in 2016.
So not that long ago.
Oh, that's funny, because I feel like that's forever ago. I think there are all these tech companies that come out that are like, we started last summer and we've got 1 million users. That's a funny perspective, because I think health insurance particularly, but really finance and insurance in general, are just so regulated and
Right.
old and just really hard to navigate that we feel like we are just like chipping away at a great wall of challenges.
Certainly. So getting that start back in 2016. So then, kind of walk us through. I mean, how did you come up with the name Catch? I mean, what's the story here?
So that wasn't our first name. I think a lot of folks have that experience, but my co-founder was actually working on projects as a freelancer with a friend, and they founded a company that they called Rio. There was a lot of data science involved with what they were doing. So the idea was Rio is like a river, like data flows like a river. Okay, I'm not a data science person. I have no expertise there. But that was sort of the name that just existed, right? It was something that they put on for projects that they were running on the side. And then as we started to build Catch and to actually grow Catch sort of under that umbrella of this company called Rio, we realized that wasn't who we were, and that wasn't an intentional naming or branding process. And so a couple months before we launched, which would be sort of mid 2017, we realized that we needed to actually like do some work and figure out like what our identity was. And anyone who's created a brand from day zero knows that it is much harder than it sounds, right? We all know what great brands are. We can name them, right? Brands that we think are incredible, like either like Allbirds or Square, or these companies that you're like, yeah, they have great brands, but from day zero, when there is nothing that exists, putting all of the pieces together is actually a huge amount of work. So we started by running through a process to get a name, and the name was sort of the first thing. And that process went horribly wrong.
How so?
We ran it by consensus. So we had about probably 10 or 12 people on our team at that point. And we wanted everyone to feel included and feel involved. And so anyone who's ever run a team knows that like you want your team to feel autonomy and ownership and all those wonderful things. And so we said, we're all going to be a part of this. And so we went through this consensus driven process. And if you've ever done anything like this before, you know that consensus just means that everyone compromises and nobody's happy. And so we ended up with a name, like long list of like, well, what do you think about when you think about a safety net? And what do you think about when you think about benefits? Or, we just tried to brainstorm all these ideas, and we sort of narrowed it down, and we came up with a name that nobody liked. Nobody liked it. Nobody hated it, but nobody liked it.
And what was the name? Do you recall the name?
Trellis.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So, the idea was, the imagery around it was sort of like you're building, right? Like on a trellis, a plant like grows up, and it's sort of the infrastructure that's there and that's sturdy. And so you can sort of grow the financial wealth and well-being in your life on top of that. But it wasn't right. And we all knew that it wasn't right. And so my co-founder, a couple days later, he sent me a text at like 6:00 in the morning, and he goes, "What do you think of the new name?" And I was like, "I hate it." I've gone from like not hating it to officially hating it. And so he and I and our head of design went back to the list of all the brainstorming we had done. And we were like, you know what, we need to take a second look at this, and not everybody needs to have an opinion. And so the three of us ultimately like went back. We saw that the word catch had been written down, because again, it was that brainstorm around like, what is a safety net? What does a safety net do for you? And I was like, oh, well, it catches you. And so we went back and we were like, you know what? I think that's the name. And the name was first. And, when you're trying to pick a name, a lot of people will go for the domain first. But we were like, we just need to have the name, and we'll figure out the domain from there. Because I think the test that we were trying to run and sort of how we thought about it was, it needs to be something that is relatively simple to say and to hear. Like if you were in a crowded bar, which sounds kind of silly in coronavirus, but like if you were in a crowded bar and it's loud and there's music and someone's like, where do you work? And you're like, oh, I work, and then like they're like, where do you work? So you want it to be a word that
Right.
was like easy to communicate across like distance and noise.
Oh, that's good.
And so catch was the thing that we were like, oh, it like sticks in your ear. And so that was ultimately why we ended up picking the name.
Wow. And so how did the company respond once you brought it before?
That was the great part, is that most of our team at that point was engineers. They didn't really care that much anyway, right? Like,
We're going back to
I
coding.
think, yeah, they're like, okay, cool, like sounds good. I think people were really receptive to it. I think especially, you kind of let people sit with it for a little bit, and you try to think through like what are all the bad things that could happen with this name, right? Like, what are the ways this could be used in ways we don't expect? Which, by the way, this is a total side note, but Samsung just launched their version of AirPods. I don't know if you saw this.
No.
It's called Buds X.
Oh, wow.
And clearly no one like said that out loud.
Bug sex.
But Buds X, and it's all one word, and it's like, okay, someone didn't run through this process with that product. So anyway, we tried to figure out what that might be, and the worst thing we could think of was like, what's the catch? And we actually realized that that was a really unique opportunity for us because, and by the way, this has happened. People will sort of like think they're being super cute on our Facebook and be like, what's the catch, right? And the answer is that freelancers and contractors don't get benefits. And it's a huge
Awesome.
catch in the system, right? And you want this flexibility and freedom, but you don't have this access to these financial products. So anyway, it worked out for us where we were able to pull together a lot of different stories around the word that really reinforce what our brand was beyond just the word itself. And if you look up the word catch, I think there's something like 21 different definitions for it, like to catch a cold versus like to catch a criminal versus. So we kind of get to use a lot of those broader meanings in various contexts. Like you said, like, how did you catch the vision, right? There's a lot of fun that we get to have with that.
That is awesome. So now that you were settled on the name, so how did you go about figuring out, okay, how are we going to brand the digital presence in terms
Mhm.
of domain extension?
Yeah. And we we knew that we didn't want certain domains because we are a consumer facing brand. So I think that was something that was important to us, is that this is a website that people need to be able to say to each other. You don't want to be doing anything that's so clever in the spelling that no one will ever find you.
Right.
And it depends. Like, it depends on what your business is doing. For certain businesses, that works fine. But for us, it was like, this is a product that we want people to share with each other. So you need to be able to communicate it. And so it needs to be speakable. So that kind of eliminated a lot of the clever endings where people do like the dot lys or the dot, like there's just a lot
Right.
of stuff that like they're not sort of the top level domains. They're sort of more specialized.
Correct. They're the country code, or yeah, country code
Yeah.
top level domain. So it'd be like doing catch, but doing cat
Hmm.
ch.
Right. That's right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And we were like, that's just really hard to explain to people. And there's not like a general awareness of how to find things like that. And particularly since the word we picked um, is a little bit difficult on SEO. Like, we think we can totally own it. Again, look at companies like Square. They can totally own
Ah,
SEO on a word that's very simple. But we were like, you know what, starting at the beginning, SEO is going to be a little bit tougher for us, right? Because this is just a word that exists in lots of other contexts. So we wanted the website to be something that was like memorable and easy to search for, even if you weren't quite sure what it was. Um, and so we did that. So we also realized that along with it, I know this isn't quite domain, but along with that, we needed our social presence to be a little bit more defined. And so we added like our social
mm,
presence was catch benefits, so that we could have like a slightly longer phrase for like how people find us on social. So if you look for catch benefits, you will find our website, even though that's not our web domain. We wanted the web domain to be short, brief, easy to communicate. So we looked at a couple different options, including like try catch, which is actually a kind of a funny coding joke. I'm not an engineer, so I don't exactly know what it is, but apparently engineers think that
Yes.
that's kind of funny.
Yeah, it is. So having a software development background, so I'm going
There
to
you
jump
go.
in there
Yeah,
just
please
real
do.
quick to go. You typically try something and then the catch is the error. So the try is all works well, does good. The catch is the error. So that's actually pretty clever. Try catch. Interesting. So what else did you come up with? You had try catch and then what?
We had try catch was one that we thought about. We thought about doing more. The other thing that we didn't like about that is we didn't want people to look at our product as an experiment because we're dealing with people's money. So we wanted there to be a lot of trust involved in what we do. Catch benefits was one that we thought about, but it just sounded a little bit like older and a little bit like stodgier, not quite like a lean venture-backed tech company that you could see being worth $1 billion. So that sort of vision of who we wanted to be was an important part of the domain. We obviously tried catch.com. That one wasn't available for us for reasons we can get into. And yeah, I think we looked at the .ios and things like that, but ultimately decided that that using .io would be more distracting and not as like useful in the communication piece.
Gotcha. Did you end up registering catchbenefits.com even though you have you have the matching catch benefits social handles, but then I guess did you wind up owning catch benefits or no?
We apparently do. I wasn't sure of the answer, so I just typed it into my browser. And apparently catchbenefits.com does redirect to catch.co.
Safe. And had it showed up available, it's like, let's register this before we release this.
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, I better check.
That is
great.
awesome. So then so in terms of catch.com, so did you try to go after making that purchase or
Yeah,
what's the story there?
We've actually tried several times to go after that domain, even since our initial purchase of catch.co.
And who's it owned by?
Catch.com is owned by Apple. Apple acquired a company in I think 2012 or 2013 that was called Catch, and it was really small. It wasn't like a big company. It was mainly like they acquired the founders, right? Like it was one of those sorts of things where they were looking to bring the founders in, and it was like a note-taking app. So it was just like some technology to take notes, and Apple acquired them, and they got the domain in that process. And I'm not fully aware of all of the standards and processes that you're supposed to use as a good steward on the internet, but my understanding is you're not really supposed to sit on domains that aren't being used for 7 years. So we have an alarm set up, in case for whatever reason, if they like let it lax, like if they just like let it lapse. We don't really think that's going to happen, but we do have that in place. We tried to reach out through a broker. And the response was pretty much immediate, which was just like, Apple doesn't sell domains. The thing is, Apple has so much money. Like there's no amount of money that you can buy from Apple, right? And be like, we want catch.com. They're either going to give it to you because they want to, or like there's no dollar amount that you can buy it for.
Right.
So that was kind of the initial take. And we were just like, you know what, we'll just go with catch.co. It was a good compromise. It was a little costly, but it wasn't super costly, especially compared to some of the .coms out there.
Right.
And so we decided that was a good way to just like move forward. We have since gotten some investors who actually worked at Apple for a very long time and who have tried to get us in. And, Apple's just such a large organization. It's really hard to find the right place. But that's one of those ones that maybe they'll be listening to this podcast, and somewhere out there, they will just think that what we're doing is important enough to just give that to us. So, but we don't really have high hopes for that. So I guess the good news in that is that we're also not at the mercy of catch.com being a used site.
Right. Right. And that's what I'd actually looked it up myself to see if it resolved, and it doesn't. So, to a certain extent, it's kind of one of those things of, yes, we know who owns it, and they're likely not to use it in conjunction to what you're doing. Right. Which is even better. So it does kind of make sense, I guess, in terms of and obviously within the domain investing world, most people are going to tout, oh, you need to go with .com. If you're going to build on
Mhm.
anything, it needs to be
Mhm.
.com. Most domain investors, yours included, own .com domains. And so, it's going to be .com within the last
Mhm.
30 years. Now, obviously, since 2012 or so, there have been, um, different domain extensions that have come about, .solutions, .services, and the list goes on. I guess somewhere past 1,500 different domain extensions. Now, that being said, and your given scenario here is pretty unique because, like I said,
Mhm.
there is no site that is developed
Mhm.
on .com, and so it's not as if you're leaking traffic, to a competitor,
Right.
and impacting their bottom line in a positive way and yours in a negative way. And
Mhm.
so, what has been the overall impact of a non.com digital presence?
I think that the biggest challenge we've had is more around the SEO than the domain. And I think that because, especially because Catch.com is, let's assume that that was the first thing you would try if you're like, oh, there's this company Catch. What is their website? Um, .co is just about as close as you can get to that, right? It's .co is very different than a lot of the other, like even the .ios and stuff like that. Um, and so I think that in terms of the domain itself, we haven't seen a huge amount of like impact. As far as I'm aware, it serves us exactly the same as if we had .com, because there is no .com, right? Like for all intents and purposes in our world, like there is no such thing as Catch.com. Um, the challenge is when people don't necessarily know your website and they just search Catch, right? There is a bit of a difficulty there. But if you do that, typically, and obviously people get slightly different results, but typically the results you'll see are seafood restaurants, uh, which
Oh,
is
okay.
great because it's so different than us, right? Like it's so different that nobody like is actually confused and they're like, wait a minute, do I want fish right now? If they're looking for us, like
Fish
that's
and
very clear.
chips.
Exactly. There is a restaurant called Catch in, I think there's one in New York and one in LA that are like high end seafood restaurants. Um, so yeah, so when people sort of Google it, there isn't actually that much SEO for us to overcome, which is surprising. But I think that there's probably some impact of folks who don't know the website at all ending up in this like, why am I looking at seafood restaurants right now? But on average, I think it has been pretty minimally impactful to not have the .com.
Now, do people inadvertently type .com as in terms of like their email address? So they're emailing you.
Yeah. That happens occasionally. That does happen occasionally. Yeah, I guess one of the hard things to know is like how often does that actually happen?
Right.
Because sometimes you never know. We've
Yeah.
seen it happen a couple times with partners. What's really interesting about it is that sometimes if there's like, let's say there's 3 people from Catch on the email, sometimes like one of them will get a .com and obviously get dropped off the thread and like nobody really notices until they're like, oh, wait a minute, 6 emails ago we sent it to like Dan@Catch.com, which is not a thing. So it does happen occasionally, but it doesn't seem like it's been, honestly, maybe in some ways it helps cut down on spam.
That is true. That is true. And so and it is an interesting thing because, and this is one of the arguments that it's an age old argument, especially within the domain industry of, companies that typically don't start out on the .com. They most often will raise a round of investment. With that investment
Hmm.
round, certain percentage is then allocated to go purchase the .com.
Hmm.
They purchase the .com. That's the end of the story. And or there are, now I have witnessed startups that have done, have launched on a non.com,
Hmm.
yet they go purchase the .com, the matching .com,
Hmm.
and then they just stay on the non.com. And what's been most interesting is hearing about, because they're able to actually see the traffic leak or the email leak,
Hmm.
just by setting up a no pun intended, a catch-all
Right,
address
right, right.
on that .com. And so, to a certain extent, though, I think you're sitting in one of the best, situations because, like I said, it's a unique brand in and of itself.
Hmm.
And so that being said, so like let's get down to just the business model in terms of Catch. So
Yeah.
obviously you said you're combining many things: savings, investment,
Mhm.
insurance for employer benefits, and so that's the general aspect. But how has Catch been impacted by COVID?
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen for the business itself, this is not about humans, but for the business itself, we've seen both positive and negative effects. And that's kind of been one of the values of having a platform-based approach, is that not everything gets taken to zero immediately. So on the negative side, what we do is we basically process paychecks for independent workers. So let's say you're a 1099, and you're earning income from a number of different sources, right? You set up Catch, and let's say you want to set aside 25% for taxes. Every time you get paid, we set aside 25% for taxes, no matter what source it's coming from, whether it's from DoorDash and Uber, or it's from like a freelance gig that you've done, or it's from like a domain that you've sold, for example. And what we're seeing on that side is that people are just getting fewer paychecks, which is not unexpected, right? But that sort of impacts our business, and that we're not able to process paychecks and to set aside the money for taxes because people aren't earning money right now. And we've seen probably, I guess it varies depending on exactly what window you're talking about, but somewhere between 30 and 40% decrease in the total number of paychecks that are going out.
Wow.
So that's big. And I think those who work in the independent workforce know they have been hit harder than traditional workers, right? One of the first things to cut is like contract work, right? That is
Right.
perceived as like optional or luxury or whatever it is. A lot of our users are photographers or hairstylists, and their work has basically gone to zero. So that's been a pretty challenging thing, and that's reflective of the challenges that individuals and families are actually going through right now. On the positive side, which again, it's positive for our business, I won't make a testament to say that this is great for the country, but we sell health insurance, and we sell health insurance to individuals, not companies, right? And so what we're seeing is that as people are being laid off, they're losing employer health insurance, and they need alternatives. And so we've been
Right.
able to support folks who maybe for the first time ever need to understand, like, what is a marketplace plan? Like, what am I, everybody's heard of, Obamacare and healthcare.gov, but for a lot of people, they've just never had to think about, like, when would I need that and how would I
Right.
get that? And Catch offers all of the same plans that are on healthcare.gov, but you use our interface to get it, which is hopefully easier to use, more clear, more aesthetically pleasing, and gives you access to licensed agents, right? We have licensed agents on the team. And so we've seen a lot of people running towards health insurance right now who otherwise might not. So we do have a financial upside on that. So it's been a very mixed bag. But it does at least feel good to feel like, hey, the reason we were building this is that we knew that people needed a better safety net. And this is really proving that thesis out.
Oh, totally. I mean, because at least at the time of this recording, we're sitting somewhere with what, a little over 25 million people that are
Yeah.
unemployed.
Yeah.
And that number's, probably growing by the second, growing by the minute as we record. And
Mhm.
so, to a certain extent, it's kind of one of those things. Now, I come from a background, obviously being self-employed. Now, help me understand uh, what like a, ADP, so Catch versus ADP.
Yeah.
Like if I'm trying to compare the two, where what's the I guess what's the proposition that Catch offers when
Yeah.
compared to ADP?
Yeah, so ADP is made for employers, right? It's made for someone who has lots of people who work for them. That is where their superpower is, and that's where it should be, right? At massive scale, ADP serves company. I don't know exactly, so you'll have to look at their website, but they serve companies like Walmart, for example, like
Right.
big companies, thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees. If you're self-employed or an independent worker, particularly if you're someone who works, I'll use this word very broadly, but in the gig economy, there are lots of
Right.
different things that are gigs, right? Musicians, whatever, but you're earning income from lots of different sources. right? And there's no software out there right now that serves you as an individual for that multitude of sources that you're making money from. And so sometimes you might get like, again, let's use a domain investor. You might get a large check and then you might not make money for a while because you don't need to, or, whatever. Or you might make lots of little checks, right? If you're doing deliveries or music gigs or whatever it might be, you might get like lots of small checks.
Right.
And so how do you manage your financial stability in that world? ADP isn't really built for that. It's like large enterprise scale, meant to make like large transactions for thousands of people at one time. We do, like, you as an individual have like a multitude of jobs. So it's almost like kind of flipping the
Right.
model on its head. Rather than one employer, lots of employees, it's like you are one person and you have lots of like income sources.
Gotcha. So
Um,
it's
yeah.
really multi micro payments.
Yeah.
Almost,
Yeah.
or at least making it, because they, in terms of relating it to domain investors, it's like you're right. You have those who they could sell a domain and not, make it sell for a couple of months, but then there's the
Mhm.
opposite end of the spectrum of folks who are going out and buying domains $20-$30 but flipping them
Mhm.
for 100, and they're
Yep.
doing that by the dozens.
Yep.
And so it's every little bit that comes in, that they would, that they, or rather we would be able to
Mhm.
utilize your service.
That's right. And
Um,
when those payments come in, the question is, how are you setting aside for taxes? Are you putting money towards retirement? Are you saving money for an emergency or for time off, right? And helping you create those buckets. And then also, again, like, get the health insurance that you need in the same place. Like, the ultimate value proposition is like, do all that stuff in one place so that the system can act intelligently. For example, if you're, a domain investor and you're one of the higher end, like large sale type investors, and you make, let's say you make $75,000 a year, and you need to get health insurance, and you do that, and that's great. But then let's say COVID hits and people aren't buying domains, and so you say, I need to start doing some of these smaller flips, right? The $20 to $30 flipping for 100, smaller transactions. Um, your income may be like, okay, you might be making $40,000 this year, maybe 35, right? Your income may have been dropped dramatically. Guess what? That has an impact on your health insurance. You can
right.
actually get tax credits from the government for that. And you as an individual don't necessarily know that, because why would you? You shouldn't have to care. This stuff is complicated and hard. And what our goal is to say, when you have all that stuff in one place, we can help do the intelligence for you. So if you're like, okay, I'm making less money now, we can say, guess what? You now qualify for tax credits that you didn't before, to help make those decisions in a smart way.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That makes sense. So then what is Catch's geographic reach? Like, how far and who do you serve?
We are in all 50 states. So we do financial services all over the country. And for insurance, we are in 38 states currently. So um, it's the easiest way to describe it. We are not in California, New York, Massachusetts, even though we're based here in Boston for insurance, because a lot of those coastal blue states have much more onerous insurance regulation.
Ah,
And so we are in the 38 states that are sort of most of the rest of the country. We're in Texas, we're in Florida, we're in Illinois, Indiana, the Dakotas. Like, most of the center of the country is solidly our range.
gotcha. Now, do you have plans on, growing that to international, which I know that is like a whole can of worms when it comes to, just the various regulations.
Yeah. So I've lived on four continents. I've lived on South America, Europe, Asia, and North America, and I love international travel. So from like a personal perspective, I'm like, I would love that. I would love the opportunity to build this somewhere else where it's helpful. We've had people in other countries be like, "Oh, we need this in our country." But you're exactly right, in that like the difficulty is that you are in completely different operating circumstances because it is dependent on government. Like in Europe, the idea that an employer would provide health insurance and retirement is like just not a part of their social understanding of how the safety net works. Um, and so the answer is not no. It's just that we would have to be like very thoughtful around where the country that made the most sense was, where we could hopefully get some leverage from everything that we've learned so far. Because what you really don't want to do is you don't want to go international and have it be the same as starting from zero. The hope is that you've kind of learned enough of a system to be more efficient by entering that market.
Right, right. Wow. That is interesting. So then, kind of here as we wrap up, obviously, I mean, what would be, your advice, to the 25 million people and growing that, find themselves unemployed? Like, where should they even start
Yeah.
in terms of just, what's the next step for them
Yeah.
in terms of just going, what do I do with my insurance? What do I do
Hmm.
about, income, or
Yeah.
what can Catch do for me?
So in the immediate term, if you find yourself without a job, I think the best thing to do is to try to start to find ways to earn income again as quickly as possible. And I think for a lot of folks that might be challenging your assumptions on what it is you do. Like when someone says, "What do you do?" Like you've got an answer. But I think that we all kind of understand the importance of having some cash flow, and that as much as possible, even though it's difficult and even though mentally you might feel like, what's the point, trying to identify like what remote roles can I look for. um, should I be delivering, I can deliver meals, I can deliver groceries, like that's helping the community, right? Like entering into the essential workforce if you're young and healthy, and able to protect yourself is a very valuable thing you can do right now, and it can help maintain cash flow. um, Having some cash flow is really important for things like Catch because we help with things like emergency savings. And you might feel like right now, I can't put any money towards savings. Obviously, I need to spend it all on rent and bills and things like that. But I think one of the things that we've found is that building a savings habit is often a lot more important than like just moving, $1,000 at one point into a savings account. And so I would just encourage people to, something like Catch can help because we work with your cash flow. Again, if you're making lots of small paychecks or even a few larger ones, we can set aside a percentage. So even if it's like 1%, putting aside a little bit of money when you're making it can make a huge difference if there's a time in the future when you're not able to make it. On
Certainly,
the insurance
especially,
side, oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, just especially that statement that you said, putting a little bit, aside for when it happens, because it's
Hmm.
even though we're starting to open up a bit, right?
Yeah.
Places are starting to open back up. People are going to start moving back around, but
Hmm.
somewhere in the near future, probably the fall, it's likely stated that, hey, we could find ourselves back under lockdown again. And
Hmm.
so it's like, well, between now and that time, you could be putting aside that percentage and
Yep.
even moving forward that should this happen again, or
Hmm.
something like it, then you already have something that's there to fall back on.
That's right. That's right. And then I'd add on the insurance side, if you are finding yourself without insurance, the most important thing to know is don't wait. A lot of your options are time sensitive, and you only have 60 days, which sounds like it's a really long time, but it's not, because getting health insurance can be very complicated. And so whatever your options are, whatever, don't wait. Don't try and say like, oh, I'll think about that in a month, or I'll think about that in the future. If you need insurance, try to understand what your options are as quickly as possible so that you're able to actually get through the process. I'd love to say that it's like a really easy process, but it's not. It's a challenge. You need like documentation and validation and all sorts of stuff around your income. And especially if you're self employed, the process for getting health insurance is quite difficult. So just make sure you're acting with expediency.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Now, for what would your advice be to that person who is, um, obviously your experience of being a leader, a business owner that just goes, hey, I want to start a business at this very moment. Like,
Hmm.
what should they be mindful of? So,
Yeah.
what are those
uh,
learned experiences, those learned
yeah.
lessons?
Yeah, there's a lot of them, but I think the number one lesson about starting a business is have constant contact with your customers, and solve a real problem. If you are like a real problem, I think particularly in this environment where the question is like, if I need to start a business in the start of a recession or whatever, can't call it that yet, but let's be clear, it's probably what's going to happen.
Economic
um,
downturn.
right, right. Starting a business in that environment means it's just even more important that you're truly asking questions around like, what is a problem, where is their need, and how am I solving that need? I think in the last decade, you can call it a bubble or not, but there were a lot of companies that made things that were just like a little bit, for lack of a better word, fluffy. You're like, maybe this is nice to have, like maybe there are a few people who find this, charming or engaging, but if you want to build a business that has the potential to be really stable and really sturdy and grow, look at real problems. And, we took on the one that we thought was the biggest problem we could think of, which was the financial safety net. And if you do that and you stay close to your customers and you get sort of constant feedback from them, what do they need? You're in a better position than most folks who start businesses. I think a lot of people and leaders, of course, you're driven by intuition, right? There's an element of like, I think there's something here, right? This whole Apple model of like, nobody knew they wanted an iPhone until there was an iPhone. But intuition's important, but you can't sort of operate in isolation outside of customers, because ultimately your customers are going to be the ones who allow you to stay in business.
Exactly. Those are great nuggets and of wisdom and insight. And so the last question here. So, I mean, is there anything else you'd like to share, or, how can folks get in contact with you or even get started using Catch?
Yeah, so we're Catch.co.
If you hadn't said that.
I'm on Twitter at Catch Kristen. You can sign up on the website.
Of course
you can tweet at me. I'm happy to talk again, especially to users and our customers. I realize I haven't talked to enough of our customers lately. That's like something I'm trying to do more of. And yeah, feel free if you have questions. Again, Twitter is an easy way to reach out. And our website has an amazing support team that are available through that. And we're always happy to hear what people need, how we can be more helpful, and particularly the challenges of independent work, because people's experiences are very different. So it's always great for us to get feedback.
Certainly. So, listeners, do reach out to Kristen as well, or catch Kristen as well. And so with that, we're out of time. So Kristen, thank you again for joining us today and sharing your entrepreneurial and your domain buying journey.
Thanks so much.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Kickstart Commerce, where we share search marketing and domain name strategies to help grow your business. Please subscribe to this podcast via iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or Podbean. Last but not least, please visit kickstartcommerce.com to subscribe to the newsletter sharing tips and tricks about the disciplines of digital strategy. Thanks, and that's all for now.